Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Healthcare Digest video. I'm Mark Martin, a principal with the Mazars Healthcare Consulting Group, and today I'm joined by Tyler Nachman. He's a manager in our Healthcare Consulting Group, and today he will be speaking on productivity staffing. Tyler?
All right, thank you, Mark. I'm Tyler Nachman. I'm here to talk to you about productivity staffing today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a little overview. We're going to talk about some pitfalls of staffing this way, some potential statistics that you might want to use based on your departments, hours per patient day, and how acuity levels will affect that, how you can determine your average daily need, and then allocating your FTEs to shifts and skill mix, and then also how we use key performance indicators to track our success with productivity budgeting. Productivity staffing is simply put is allocating your staff by using a meaningful unit of service to your department, so you can have an appropriate staffing levels for whatever might occur with a upswing in volume or a downtick in volume. You're not going to be spending more money than you need to on staff, and you're not going to be spending a bunch of overtime hours because you can't get those people staffed to care for your patients. So the first thing we got to cover is what an FTE is. So a lot of people look at an FTE and they consider one employee as an FTE. That's not always the case. So an FTE, full-time employment, is 80 hours a year. That's 40 hours per week, 80 hours per pay period over 26 pay periods. So while many employees are 1.0 FTE, a lot of nurses are not, because nurses generally don't work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so it's really important that we look at nursing, we don't budget those individuals as 1.0 FTE on the schedules, on the staff, because it's going to throw off our staffing expense over the month and over the year as well. So because we have the 80 hours a year, we also have to consider some pitfalls that I've seen happen when it comes to budgeting. So when you have a 1.0 FTE, you don't want to budget them as lower than a 1.0 because you're anticipating work reduction, or because no one works 80 hours a year, everybody takes PTO. That 1.0 FTE is going to be inclusive of that PTO time, which you're gonna put into your budget. So an example I always like to use is if you have a $100K a year salary employee with a 10% PTO structure, if that employee were to work 80 hours a year and never take a day off, you would pay that employee $100,000 a year, and then you would have a liability on your books of $10,000 to cover their PTO. So a yearly cost for that employee would be $110,000. If that employee uses all 10% of their 10% of their PTO, or 10% of their hours of PTO, that's $90,000 a year plus the $10,000 in PTO. And so your overall expense to the organization is only $100,000 a year. The other thing to consider would be that when that person leaves and goes on PTO, you may have to backfill them. So depending on the position, it's a nurse, or if it's a phlebotomy tech or something like that, you'll have to bring in another employee to cover those hours. So the work reduction is not really helping you on the expense side. So once you get your FTEs figured out, we need to figure out what department specific statistics are meaningful for the leader's department. So not every department needs to be budgeted on patient days, because patient days is an inpatient metric. Well, many of our departments in a hospital or clinic setting are outpatient, or not related to patient care at all. I mean, they are related to patient care in the sense that everybody works together, but they're not driven by patient care. So you want to think about what the department contributes to the organization and budget off of that as the service. So for example, lab might be budgeted on lab tests run, food services might be budgeted on meals served, meals sold. I've even seen housekeeping departments budgeted off square footage, and that gives them a little flexibility. If a new clinic were to open, their square footage would expand and they would be able to staff up appropriately. You can see some of the potential statistics or units of service here. Some are inpatient, like the midnight census. OR minutes might be an inpatient surgery or outpatient surgery. Treatments could be applicable to many outpatient departments like physical therapy. Tests run that could be, used for lab or even certain diagnostic imaging. Meal served and sold, as I mentioned. Patient visits for an outpatient clinic. Also, patient encounters are in there. And then work orders, work tickets might be something you'd want to budget your IT department or your supply chain departments as well. So when we do look at patient days as the metric, there is one other consideration, and that's going to be the patient's acuity level. So when we do use patient days as a unit of service metric, there's some additional considerations. And you can ask yourself the questions: will you need more advanced nurses to care for the patient? Does the patient require a level of care that can't be completed by a less experienced or lower licensed staff? If so, do you have that? Do you have the higher licensed staff in your labor pool that you can call in? Can the leader staff up and staff down and use flexible employees or staffing in their RN pool or their labor pool, depending on what kind of department you're in? Are you willing to send people home to bring in that higher licensed employee? Those are the things that you consider, because if you have a 30-year highly experienced nurse, that nurse is likely going to cost you significantly more than a new grad in their first and second year. So now that we've covered FTEs and staffing models, how do we calculate a starting place to start your staffing? So if we look at average daily need as a starting point, the best way to do this is to use mode rather than mean or median. So if we can find the historical mean, median, and mode and develop baseline staffing that can be adjusted up and down for patient need, the leader must understand whether it's easier to bring in additional float staff or send excess staff home. So if we look at the mean, which is the average, all that we're doing there is we're adding all the data points together and dividing them by the number of data points. So for example, 4, 1, and 7 is 4 plus 1 plus 7 divided by 3. Add what's in the parentheses, you get 12 divided by 3 is 4. So we find that our mean, or the average of those three numbers, is 4. And then the issue there is that if the leader staffs at the mean every day, half the days are going to have unmet staffing needs. Similarly, with the median is the middle number. So 4, 1, and 7 again. And then if you put them in order, 4 is going to be the number in the middle. And then if the leader staffs the median, days above the median are going to be understaffed. So the most useful calculation is the mode, which is the most frequently occurring number. So we have a small data set here to keep it simple. The mode of 4, 2, 4, 3, 2, and 2 is 2 because it occurs 3 times, which is more than any other number. So if we looked at a 30-day period and you were to staff to your most frequently occurring number and staff up and down accordingly, it's less likely that you're going to find yourself in a situation where you are understaffed or way overstaffed. So what does this all mean? How can we use this to determine the success of a department? So if we look at our key performance indicators, or KPIs, it's a great way to track and monitor productivity. So the 3 examples I'll give here are hours per unit of service, salaries per unit of service, and FTEs per unit of service. So the one caution I would say is that not all salaries are equivalent, as we mentioned, with the high licensed nursing and high experienced staff. So if you did have a situation like that, you'd want to look at salaries per unit of service mostly rather than FTEs, because you might have 3 FTEs that cost you $80 an hour versus 3 FTEs that cost you $30 an hour. And if you look at FTEs per unit of service, it's treating those as equivalents. So if our hours per unit of service, generally, if we have an average salary, if our hours per unit of service are decreasing, that means that we're spending less money on staffing than we anticipated in the budget, which is going to benefit our labor expenses. And then obviously some cases, certain employees are so much more expensive than others that reducing that one employee might allow you to have 2 or 3 lower paid employees come in to cover that. And that's all just about having a flexible staffing model, which I had covered previously. So in conclusion, productivity staffing improves employee utilization and bottom line expenses. So if you have proactive leaders with a flexible staff that they can increase or decrease depending on the patient levels or whatever the levels are for your unit of service, you're going to be able to really manage that staffing budget from a daily basis rather than maybe looking back 2 weeks or a month and then trying to dig yourself out of a hole. It's very important that each department staffs to a meaningful unit of service. It'd be very hard for the materials management supply chain to be budgeted off lab tests run. That's not a meaningful statistic for them. It's one in there. Also, it keeps employees working at the top of their license, which in general is going to keep employees more satisfied. They're not doing things that are under their education or training levels. And then we're also going to be able to reduce overtime, non-productive hours, because we're not going to constantly be scrambling to bring employees on. We have a patient surge, or we're not have to send a bunch of patients home when we have a lull, or employees home when we have a lull. And then overall impact to the organization and the department, which is going to be improving the bottom line expenses of the department level, which is going to improve the contribution margin, and the financial improvement can be seen at the organization as a whole. So thanks for watching this video. My name is Tyler Nachman. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me or Mark. Our contact info card. Thank you.